The music from the string quartet drifted softly across the reception hall, a melody meant to frame joy, not conflict. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, champagne glass in hand, when I felt a sudden tug at my arm. My mother's voice, tight and deliberate, cut through the chatter. "Celine, we need a word now." Before I could respond, my father was beside her, his grip firm on my elbow. They steered me toward a corner of the hall, away from the crowd but still within sight of curious eyes. My chest tightened. I had sensed this moment coming all evening, though I told myself I was being paranoid. "Daniel and Heather deserve a proper start," my mother said, her tone smooth as porcelain but sharp underneath. "It's time you did the right thing." I looked from her face to my father's, waiting for clarity, but he wasted no time. "Give them your penthouse," Gerald demanded flatly. "Announce it tonight as their wedding gift." For a moment the words didn't register. The audacity of it felt surreal, like I had stepped into a play where my lines had been swapped without warning. "Buy home," I said quietly. "That's not yours to give." "You don't need it," my father pressed, his voice low but firm. "You're single. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, all that space for one person. Selfish. Your brother has a family to build." Conversations faltered. Guests noticed our cornered huddle. My refusal was calm, measured. "No. I worked for that home. It's mine." The next moment happened in a blur. My father's hand rose and struck me across the face, the sound cracking through the reception louder than the music. Gasps rippled through the room. My cheek burned, my head snapping to the side. The silence that followed was heavier than the blow itself. 250 eyes locked on us, frozen between disbelief and judgment. I straightened my spine, forced my voice steady, and whispered so only he could hear, "You just lost me." I set my glass on a nearby table and walked through the parted crowd, each step carrying me further from the life I had once begged to belong to. If you've ever had to walk away from family to protect your worth, drop a comment below and share your story. Hit that subscribe button to join me on this journey with Warth stories. I learned early what it meant to be background noise in my own home. In Portland, the Calloway household revolved around Daniel, 3 years younger than me and treated as though he carried the family's legacy on his small shoulders. My father spoke of him with pride that seemed inexhaustible, as if Daniel were the answer to every hope he had ever carried for the Calloway name. I was expected to understand. After all, I was the daughter. One day I would marry, change my last name and fade into someone else's story. Daniel, by contrast, was the son who would keep the bloodline intact. That belief shaped every decision my parents made. When Daniel brought home a report card scattered with B's, it was framed on the refrigerator. When I came home with straight A's and first-place ribbons from debate tournaments, my mother smiled politely and asked if I'd remembered to set the table. Daniel joined the soccer team and my parents bought him new cleats, uniforms and paid for extra coaching. When I needed new track shoes, I was told to use babysitting money. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it was doctrine. My father's voice carried across every football field Daniel played on, cheering until he was hoarse. My debate championships, my track meets, they were too often missed, excused by errands or family priorities. First I tried harder. I thought if I could be perfect, if I could excel beyond question, they would see me. Scholarships, honor roll, extracurriculars. I stacked them like bricks in a wall, hoping the height would force them to look up. They didn't. What they saw was a daughter who could take care of herself and a son who always needed more. Daniel became their center and I became the shadow orbiting around him. Yet in that shadow, a determination began to grow, quiet, steady, unshakable. If no one else would claim my worth, then I would. That fire carried me into the years where I would build a life of my own, a life they never thought I deserved. College was my escape hatch, though it came at a price. I earned scholarships through grades and competitions, but they never covered everything. By graduation, I carried $40,000 in student loans on my shoulders. My parents reminded me often that I was lucky to even be there, since all their savings were tied up for Daniel's future. I nodded, swallowed the sting and paid my own bills. When I stepped into the financial world, I knew there would be no shortcuts. I took every project no one else wanted, volunteered for holiday shifts, stayed long after the office emptied. My friends from school posted pictures from beach vacations and weekend getaways. I stayed at my desk, eyes blurry from spreadsheets, clinging to the belief that this grind would lead me somewhere no one could deny. 80-hour weeks became my normal. Birthdays were forgotten. Relationships ended before they could begin. My body ached from the pace, but my portfolio grew. By 28, I had moved up to senior financial advisor, one of the youngest in the firm. Clients trusted me, not because I was charming but because I delivered results when others wouldn't. At 30, I signed papers for the purchase of my penthouse in downtown Seattle. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, walls of glass opening onto views of the skyline and Puget Sound. The price tag was $1.5 million, a number that once would have been unfathomable. As I stood in the empty living room that first night, city lights spilling across polished floors, I let myself believe I had finally secured something no one could diminish. Meanwhile, Daniel floated from one short-lived job to another, always cushioned by my parents. They excused his failures as finding his way, wrote checks when he couldn't cover rent, and boasted about his potential as if it were an achievement. He had safety nets at every turn while I had cliffs. It was a contrast too sharp to ignore, though I tried, because sooner or later I would learn just how much my success had become a target. Daniel met Heather at a friend's gathering, and from the first introduction, I could tell she was gentle in a way my brother needed. She was a kindergarten teacher with endless patience, the sort of woman who smiled through interruptions and listened without rushing to speak. 8 months later, when they announced their engagement, my parents reacted as though royalty had blessed our family. They didn't have much in savings, but that didn't stop them from promising to cover the entire wedding. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I had asked for help with tuition, there was never enough to spare. For Daniel, though, they were willing to stretch retirement funds thin, calling it an investment in the future of the family. I wanted to be supportive despite the old sting. When I offered to host an engagement dinner at my penthouse, Heather seemed genuinely grateful. She admired the view, asked thoughtful questions about my work, and thanked me more than once. For a brief evening, I let myself believe maybe this milestone could bring us closer. Then came the subtle shift. Mom wandered through my home as though she were conducting an inspection, running her hand along countertops and pausing at artwork. "All very modern," she remarked, her tone laced with disapproval. Gerald, never subtle, asked outright what the mortgage was, whether I thought it wise to tie up so much money in one place. His words were framed as curiosity, but the edge was sharp enough to cut. The dinner carried on with laughter and toasts, but beneath it ran an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. My home wasn't admired, it was measured, weighed, and quietly criticized. I caught the way my parents exchanged glances when Heather complimented the terrace, and I felt a shift inside me. What I had built, what I had fought for, was no longer just my achievement. It had become something for them to covet. I brushed it off that night, telling myself I was imagining shadows where none existed. But those shadows only grew darker in the weeks that followed. The weeks leading up to the wedding blurred into errands and obligations. I picked up Daniel's tuxedo when he forgot it at the tailor, stuffed envelopes with last-minute invitations, and even coordinated the florist when the original delivery ran behind schedule. Heather was gracious every step, apologizing for the chaos and thanking me for stepping in. I told her not to worry. Truthfully, I wanted to ease her stress, even if it meant carrying more than my share. At the rehearsal dinner, I raised a glass to toast the couple. My words came easily, a hope that Heather's patience would soften Daniel's stubborn streak, and that together they'd build something strong. Guests clapped. Heather teared up, and for a brief moment I felt included, like maybe all the old wounds were finally scabbing over. But then the whispers began, small drifting comments that floated just within earshot. An aunt leaned toward another relative and murmured, that penthouse of hers would be perfect for them. A cousin smirked as she passed me on her way to the buffet, whispering, "Lucky Daniel." At first I brushed it off as the idle speculation that fills family gatherings. But the chorus grew louder, more pointed. I overheard my uncle remark, "She can't possibly need all that space on her own." Another chimed in, "Generosity runs in families. She'll do the right thing." The turning point came when my cousin Sophia pulled me aside in the hallway, her expression serious. "Celine, you need to know something. Your parents have been telling people you're giving Daniel the penthouse as a wedding gift. They've been saying it for weeks." I stared at her, stunned. "That's absurd. I never said that." "I know," she whispered quickly, "but they've told so many people. It's practically gospel now. Be careful tomorrow." Her warning settled into me like a stone. I felt my face heat with both anger and disbelief. How could they twist my success into something I was expected to hand over, as if all the years of sacrifice meant nothing? Still, I smiled when I returned to the table, determined not to let it show. For Heather's sake, for the day she had dreamed about, I swallowed the unease and focused on celebrating her. I told myself the whispers were just talk, but beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, I knew something was gathering, waiting to break open. The reception hall glittered with lights strung across the ceiling, the kind of atmosphere meant to make everything feel enchanted. I sat at the long head table, smiling for photographs, clinking glasses when prompted, and trying to ignore the way my parents kept scanning the crowd as though ensuring everyone was watching. Dinner plates were cleared, wine refilled, and then my father rose from his chair, tapping his knife against the side of his champagne flute. The room hushed almost immediately. Gerald Calloway had always carried a presence that demanded attention, and tonight was no exception. He began his speech with stories about Daniel's childhood, how he was always the boy with the biggest heart, the one who stayed close to family, who brought laughter into the house. Guests chuckled and Daniel beamed beside Heather. I wanted to believe for a moment that this was just a father's joy spilling over, but then his tone shifted, subtle at first, then deliberate. "Some people," he said, pausing to let the silence grow, "are blessed with natural abilities, with success that seems to come easily. They collect wealth, possessions, accomplishments." His eyes swept the room but landed on me. "Others, like Daniel, are blessed in different ways, with generosity, with loyalty, with love for family above all else." A ripple of discomfort passed through the crowd. I felt it as surely as the heat rising in my cheeks. He lifted his glass higher. "And family is what truly matters. As Daniel and Heather begin their life together, I know those among us who have been fortunate will step up to ensure they have the proper start in a proper home." The implication was unmistakable. Heads turned, glances flicked toward me, some curious, some pitying. My stomach twisted as the weight of 200 eyes pressed in. My father's toast was not a celebration. It was a public trap. I forced a smile, lifted my own glass and clinked it against Heather's, though my hand trembled slightly. No words came from me. Silence was the only shield I had left in that moment. But inside, the walls were closing and I could feel the confrontation circling closer, inevitable now, impossible to ignore. The music from the dance floor pulsed faintly as my parents guided me into a smaller side room, a space meant for the bride and groom to steal quiet moments. My mother shut the door behind us, leaving the sound of laughter and clinking glasses muffled beyond the walls. The air inside was heavy, charged with something I had felt building for weeks. "You've had your moment," my father began, his jaw set, voice sharp with authority. "Now it's time to think about your brother's future." I folded my arms, steadying myself. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Mom stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as if I were a disobedient child again. "Daniel and Heather can't start their life in that tiny apartment. You have more space than you'll ever need, 3 bedrooms, a terrace. You're alone, Celine. Don't you think it's time to share what you have?" I let out a short laugh, more disbelief than humor. "Share? You're talking about my home, the one I worked for, the one I sacrificed years to afford. You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for us," she shot back. "We raised you, gave you life, put a roof over your head. Now it's your turn to give back." Something inside me cracked. "You didn't pay for college. You didn't show up at my meets. You saved everything for Daniel's future while I fought for mine. Don't stand here and pretend I owe you the roof over my head when I built it without you." My father's face hardened. He stepped closer, voice low but dangerous. "This isn't a request, Celine. Sign the penthouse over to Daniel or you're no daughter of mine." The words hung like a blade and I knew the choice had finally arrived, as brutal and final as the slap that was waiting just ahead. The shouting had carried further than I realized. By the time my father's voice rose above mine, shadows filled the doorway. Relatives lingered, uncertain, curiosity pulling them closer. Then Gerald turned, his expression twisting into something almost performative. "Your sister is giving you her penthouse," he announced, projecting his voice toward the hall where guests were beginning to gather. A murmur rippled through the crowd, eyes darting between Daniel, Heather, and me. My brother looked confused, his new wife pale with shock. I stepped forward, steadying my voice. "That isn't true. I never said that." Gasps broke the silence, sharp intakes of breath like cracks in glass. My father's face darkened, and in that moment he seemed less apparent and more a man cornered, desperate to hold authority slipping away. "Stop embarrassing us," he hissed. "You'll do as you're told." "I won't," I answered, each word deliberate. "The penthouse is mine. It isn't a wedding gift. It never was." The room tightened around us, whispers swelling like a tide. I felt the weight of every gaze, the sting of judgment, but I stood unmoving. For once, I wasn't shrinking beneath their expectations. And then, in one violent instant, the argument ended. His hand came down across my cheek with a crack that echoed louder than the music outside. My head snapped sideways, the sting blooming into heat that pulsed beneath my skin. The silence that followed was suffocating. Heather's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel didn't move, rooted in place, his silence louder than any defense he could have offered. My mother looked away as though distance could erase what had just happened. I straightened, ignoring the burn on my face, and locked eyes with the man who had struck me. My voice dropped to a whisper, calm but final. "You just lost me." Without another word, I pushed through the stunned circle of guests, each step deliberate, leaving behind the music, the lights, and the family that had finally shown me exactly what I meant to them. By the time I reached my penthouse, the adrenaline had burned off, leaving only a hollow ache. I closed the door behind me and slid to the floor, pressing my palms against the cold tile as sobs ripped through me. My cheek throbbed, a deep red mark already darkening into what I knew would be a bruise. When I finally lifted my phone, the screen glowed with missed calls and messages. Some were from cousins and friends, voices of outrage and comfort. "What your father did was wrong. We're here if you need anything." Others carried blame like barbed wire. "You ruined your brother's wedding. Apologize before it's too late." Daniel's text cut the deepest. He didn't ask if I was hurt, didn't question what our father had done. Instead, "You made a scene." Heather's crying. "You ruined everything." My parents' voicemails painted me as the aggressor, twisting reality into a narrative where I had provoked, embarrassed, betrayed. The next morning, Heather arrived unannounced. She stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes wide when she saw the bruise. "Celine, I didn't realize it was that bad." I let her in, though I kept distance between us. She hesitated before speaking. "They told us weeks ago that you'd promised the penthouse, that it was only a matter of when you'd announce it. I believed them. I thought you were being generous." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." I studied her, searching for any sign of complicity, but all I saw was shame. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally. "But believing them nearly cost me everything. I can't keep pretending this family isn't what it is." Heather nodded, unable to meet my eyes. When she left, I felt the quiet settle differently, no longer grief alone, but the beginning of a line I would not let them cross again. The bruise on my cheek faded, but I made sure to document it. Photos, dates, notes, proof of what had been done. Margaret, my closest friend, urged me into therapy, and for once I didn't argue. Week by week, I learned to name the years of neglect for what they were and to understand that survival wasn't selfishness. My circle tightened. Friends like Margaret and Allison stepped in with meals, laughter, and presence that felt more like family than anything I'd known at home. Then came the letter, cold, formal, typed on my father's business stationery. "Sign the penthouse over to Daniel, or you will no longer be our daughter." No apology, no acknowledgement of violence, only a transaction disguised as legacy. I filed it away without reply. Their silence afterward was louder than their words. Months passed. Work flourished. My name floated for partnership, and I used my first real bonus to redecorate the penthouse. Not for appearances but for me. I filled it with bold colors, soft chairs, and walls that finally reflected my taste, not theirs. It became a sanctuary, not a battleground. When I ran into Daniel at a cafe, he looked smaller somehow, his eyes tired. He muttered that things at home weren't the same, that Heather questioned their parents' hold on him. For a heartbeat, I felt the tug of wanting to reach back, but I remembered the bruise, the whispers, the silence. "If you want a relationship, it has to be without them controlling it," I said. Blood may bind, but I had learned at last. Only respect makes a family. I stood firm, and in that moment I realized I had already built my own family. One that saw my worth without demanding my sacrifice. The penthouse remained mine, a testament to the life I had earned, not owed. My parents' expectations, Daniel's entitlement, the weight of their judgment, they no longer defined me. I moved forward, surrounded by friends who celebrated my victories and a career that reflected my resilience. The Callaway name might carry on through Daniel, but my legacy would be different. One built on self-respect, boundaries, and the courage to walk away from those who couldn't see me. Thank you for staying with my story until the end. It means the world to share this journey with you. Have you ever had to stand up to family to protect what you've built? What did it teach you about your own strength? Drop a comment below and let's talk. Your stories matter, and I'm grateful for every one of you who listened. This is Warth Stories signing off.